School custodian leaves motivational notes in lockers, unaware he's inspiring a future Nobel winner. That's what Mr. Raymond Ellis had been doing for 27 years, long before Eliza Chen ever stepped foot in Westbrook High. His weathered hands, spotted with age and calloused from decades of labor, carefully folded each small square of paper with a precision that belied their humble origins. The early February morning wrapped the empty school hallways in silence, broken only by the soft squeak of Raymond's maintenance cart and the occasional jingle of his keys. Outside, darkness still claimed the sky, stars fading as dawn approached. This was his time, these quiet hours before the chaos of adolescent energy flooded the corridors. At 63, Raymond moved with the deliberate care of someone who had learned that rushing rarely improved outcomes, in cleaning or in life. Today's note read, "Your struggles today are developing the strength you need for tomorrow." 17 words that had taken him nearly an hour to compose at his kitchen table the night before, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold while he searched for the right message. He never knew which student might find his notes or whether they would make any difference at all. But still, he wrote them. Still, he placed them. Raymond paused at locker 1422, slipping the folded paper through the narrow vent slots. Something about this particular locker had caught his attention weeks ago. The way its owner never adorned it with photos or stickers like the others. Just bare metal, meticulously organized textbooks visible through the vents. It reminded him of himself at that age. Present but invisible, existing in the margins. 3 hallways away, 16-year-old Eliza Chen sat alone in the library, having convinced the morning security guard to let her in early. Again, dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of another night spent studying instead of sleeping. Her MIT sweatshirt, purchased from a thrift store in 3 sizes too large, hung from her thin frame like a shield. On the table before her lay open textbooks on quantum mechanics and advanced calculus, material well beyond her junior year curriculum. "You're here early again, Miss Chen," Mr. Garvey, the librarian, observed as he flipped on the lights. "School doesn't start for another hour and a half." Eliza didn't look up. "Heat's out in our apartment again," she replied, her voice flat, rehearsed. It wasn't entirely a lie. The heat was indeed unreliable. But it wasn't the whole truth either. The truth involved her father's night terrors, the screaming that started around 3 a.m., and the impossibility of concentration in their cramped one-bedroom apartment where privacy was a luxury they couldn't afford. "I see." Mr. Garvey's tone suggested he didn't quite believe her, but wouldn't press. "Well, the cafeteria opens in 30 minutes if you want breakfast." Eliza nodded without committing. Breakfast meant spending one of the free meal tickets the school counselor had discreetly provided. She was saving those for days when dinner at home wasn't an option. At home, Raymond's modest one-story house sat dark and quiet. His wife, Margaret, had been gone 7 years now. Cancer. Quick and brutal. The physical reminders of her had slowly been packed away, but her absence remained, a presence in itself that filled every corner with what wasn't there anymore. Their son Michael hadn't returned for the funeral. 15 years of silence after that final explosive argument where words became weapons, leaving wounds too deep for bandages of apology. Raymond often wondered where Michael was now. Whether he had children, grandchildren, Raymond would never know. Whether he had found whatever he was looking for when he left. Whether he was happy. The custodian's routine rarely varied. 5 days a week, he arrived at Westbrook High at 4:30 a.m., working in solitude until the first teachers arrived around 6:45. He developed a system: hallways first, then bathrooms, gymnasium, cafeteria. Every surface spotless, every floor gleaming. Most students never saw him work. To them, clean hallways simply happened, like sunrise or seasonal change. Few knew about the notes. It had started as a private ritual after Margaret died, a way to speak the encouragements she could no longer give. One morning, feeling particularly hollow, he'd written the words she used to tell him on difficult days. "This moment is hard, but you are stronger." He'd folded it and, without planning to, slipped it into a random locker. The small action had eased something tight in his chest. So he continued, 1 note per day, random lockers. Never signed, never mentioned. A private communion with memories of Margaret, with the son he'd lost, with some larger purpose he couldn't quite name. Eliza arrived at her locker just before first period, her movements mechanical. Open exchange books, close. But today, something fluttered to the floor as she pulled out her chemistry textbook. A small square of paper folded with careful precision. She almost walked away, assuming it was trash. But something, curiosity, or perhaps the unusual neatness of the fold, made her stoop to retrieve it. Your struggles today are developing the strength you need for tomorrow. She read it twice, then crumpled it and shoved it into her pocket. Probably some school initiative, she thought, or a religious student leaving propaganda. Either way, it wasn't meant for her. Nothing ever was. That afternoon, while mopping the science wing, Raymond noticed a crumpled paper near the recycling bin. He wouldn't have thought anything of it, except for the familiar creases of his distinctive folding technique. Smoothing it open, he recognized his own handwriting, his own words. Discarded, rejected. His shoulders slumped slightly. What had he expected? These were teenagers, navigating the complex ecosystem of high school social hierarchies, romantic entanglements, academic pressures. What difference could 17 words on a scrap of paper possibly make? Foolish old man, he muttered, dropping the crumpled note into his pocket instead of the trash. Margaret would have told him to keep trying. Margaret would have believed one message might reach the right person at the right moment. But Margaret had always been the optimist between them. That night, Eliza sat at the kitchen table in their apartment, attempting to concentrate on her homework while her father paced. The medication helped with the worst of his PTSD symptoms, but they couldn't afford the higher dosage the doctor recommended. Not with the medical bills still piling up from her mother's final hospitalization 3 years ago. "Did you eat today?" she asked, not looking up from her calculus. Her father paused his pacing. "I had something." His vague answer told her everything. "I'll make pasta," she said, closing her textbook. "You should study. I can do both." As water boiled on their temperamental stove, Eliza emptied her pockets, preparing to wash her jeans. The crumpled note fell out. She smoothed it absently, reading the words again. "Your struggles today are developing the strength you need for tomorrow." Something caught in her throat. Not quite emotion, but its distant cousin. She folded the note properly and tucked it into her physics textbook before turning back to the pasta. The next morning, Raymond placed another note. "The universe doesn't waste pain. It becomes fuel for something greater." He hesitated at locker 1422, remembering yesterday's rejected message. Then, with a small shake of his head, he slipped the paper through the vents. Perhaps today would be different. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Raymond continued leaving notes in random lockers, but always included 1422 in his rotation. And Eliza, though initially skeptical, began keeping them. A small collection grew between the pages of her textbooks, fragments of encouragement that seemed to arrive on her hardest days. Your worth isn't measured by productivity. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. Rest isn't weakness, it's wisdom. She never mentioned them to anyone, never tried to discover their source. They existed in a separate reality from her daily struggles, a small secret light she could turn to when darkness pressed too close. March brought college acceptance letters. Eliza had applied to 17 schools, all with substantial financial aid programs. Rejections came from Princeton, Yale, Stanford, waitlisted at Columbia and Cornell. But then Harvard, full scholarship. The impossible made possible. That evening, she sat on the fire escape outside their apartment, the acceptance letter clutched in her hands, tears streaming silently down her face. Not from joy, though that existed too, but from the crushing weight of a decision already made. Harvard meant Boston. Boston meant leaving her father alone in New York. Her father, who sometimes forgot to eat, who couldn't always distinguish between memory and present reality, who needed her in ways neither of them fully acknowledged. The next morning, a new note waited in her locker. "Sometimes the bravest thing is to accept the help you deserve." Eliza traced the handwriting with her fingertip, wondering if some cosmic force was orchestrating these messages specifically for her moments of need. The thought was irrational, unscientific, everything her analytical mind rejected. Yet the coincidence felt significant in ways she couldn't articulate. That same day during lunch period, she saw him for the first time, really saw him, the custodian. Elderly, slightly stooped, meticulously cleaning soda spilled near the cafeteria entrance. Students flowed around him as if he were invisible, a human rock in a teenage river. No one said thank you. No one offered to help. No one even seemed to notice the care with which he worked. Something about his focused attention, the dignity in his movements despite being ignored, caught Eliza's attention. She watched as he finished cleaning, then reached into his pocket and removed a small square of paper, carefully folded. Her breath caught as he slipped it into the vent of a locker before continuing down the hallway. Raymond felt the girl's eyes on him before he saw her. Years of working in the background had given him a sixth sense for when he was being observed. He glanced up, catching the gaze of a thin Asian girl in an oversized MIT sweatshirt. Unlike most students who quickly looked away when caught noticing the custodian, she held his gaze for a moment. Then surprisingly, she nodded, a small acknowledgement of his existence that felt strangely significant. He returned the nod, then continued his work. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't place why. That afternoon, Eliza approached her guidance counselor's office with uncharacteristic hesitation. Miss Abernathy looked up from her computer, surprise crossing her features. "Eliza, come in. What can I help you with?" Eliza sat, hands fidgeting in her lap. "I got into Harvard," she said quietly. "That's wonderful news." Miss Abernathy's smile faded as she registered Eliza's expression. "Isn't it? Full scholarship. Even better. So what's troubling you?" "My dad," Eliza said simply. The two words contained volumes. Understanding softened Miss Abernathy's features. "You're worried about leaving him alone." Eliza nodded, staring at her hands. "He's not stable. Not always. The VA helps some, but..." She trailed off. "Have you talked to him about it?" "He'll tell me to go. He'll say he's fine. And you don't believe he will be." "I know he won't be." Miss Abernathy leaned forward. "Eliza, you can't sacrifice your future to be your father's caretaker. That's not what he wants, and deep down, you know that's not what's best for either of you. Then what am I supposed to do?" For the first time, Eliza's voice cracked, the perfect student facade slipping to reveal the frightened daughter beneath. "Let me make some calls. There are programs designed specifically for veterans in your father's situation. Support systems that could help him while you're away. We've tried programs before, but you haven't tried all of them. And you haven't tried with the school's advocacy behind you." Ms. Abernathy smiled gently. "Let someone else be strong for a change, Eliza. You don't have to carry everything alone." The words echoed the mysterious notes so closely that Eliza blinked in surprise. Could Ms. Abernathy be behind them? But no, she'd seen the custodian place one herself. That night, she carefully removed all the notes from her textbooks, arranging them on her bed. 14 messages in total. 14 days of someone taking the time to write words of encouragement for strangers. For her, for the first time since finding them, she wondered about the person behind the notes. What motivated someone, the custodian, to this daily act of anonymous kindness? What did he gain from words sent into the void, never knowing their impact? The following morning, she arrived at school early, hovering near the entrance, watching. Sure enough, the elderly custodian appeared, pushing his cart down the empty hallway. She followed at a distance, observing as he slipped notes into several lockers, including hers. When he moved to the next hallway, she quickly opened her locker. Today's note read, "Your potential is like a light. Don't dim it to make others comfortable." Impulsively, she took a notebook from her backpack, scribbled something, and folded it carefully. Then she walked to the custodian's maintenance closet and slipped her note under the door. Raymond found the unfamiliar paper when he returned for cleaning supplies. Unlike his carefully folded notes, this was folded hastily, urgently. He opened it with curiosity. "Thank you for the notes. They help more than you know. Minus 1,422. His hands trembled slightly. In 27 years of leaving notes, this was the first acknowledgement he'd ever received. The first confirmation that his words reached someone, mattered to someone. Margaret would have loved this moment. He tucked the note carefully into his wallet, next to the faded photo of Michael at 10 years old, gap-toothed and smiling in a way he never would again after adolescence arrived with its arsenal of insecurities and conflicts. The next day, Eliza found a different kind of note in her locker. Longer, more personal. To 1422, thank you for your kindness in responding. In a world that often feels disconnected, your acknowledgement meant more than I can express. Whatever struggles you're facing, please know that someone sees your strength even when you can't. For reasons she couldn't fully articulate, tears sprang to Eliza's eyes. She hadn't cried when her mother died. She'd been too busy helping her father navigate his grief alongside his PTSD. Hadn't cried during the nights they'd gone hungry before figuring out the social services system. Hadn't cried when classmates mocked her thrift store clothes or her intense focus on academics. But here in the bustling hallway of Westbrook High, a few simple words of recognition from an elderly custodian broke something open inside her. She wrote back, "How did you know which locker to leave notes in? Mine isn't special." His response the next day, "I leave notes in many lockers. But yours caught my attention because it reminds me of myself at your age. Organized, private, determined. I sense a fellow observer of life." Thus began their correspondence. Notes exchanged daily, neither ever acknowledging the other in person. For Raymond, the exchanges became the highlight of his day, For Eliza, they became a lifeline as she navigated the complex decision about Harvard and her father's care. April arrived with unexpected developments. Ms. Abernathy had indeed made calls, setting in motion support systems Eliza hadn't known existed. Her father, after initial resistance, agreed to meet with a VA counselor who specialized in cases like his. The meeting went surprisingly well. He actually listened to her. Eliza told the custodian through their notes. He's going to try a new treatment program, and there's a veterans housing community with on-site support staff. He's considering it. Raymond wrote back, "Sometimes accepting help is the strongest choice we can make. I'm learning that too." As their exchange deepened, Raymond began sharing pieces of his own story. Margaret, Michael, the years of regret. Eliza shared her Harvard acceptance, her mother's death, her fears about leaving her father. "I think I need to go," she wrote in late April, "to Harvard, but I'm terrified of what might happen if I do." "Fear and courage always coexist," he responded. "The question isn't whether you're afraid, but whether you'll let fear make your decisions." What neither of them realized was how these exchanges were transforming them both. Raymond began speaking to his neighbors, accepting dinner invitations he'd declined for years. He called his brother after a decade of minimal contact. He even reached out to a private investigator about possibly locating Michael. Eliza, meanwhile, started allowing herself small indulgences, joining her classmates for lunch occasionally, spending an hour reading fiction instead of scientific journals, calling her Harvard roommate-to-be for conversations that weren't just about academics. In their notes, they developed a shorthand, inside jokes, mutual encouragement. They never discussed meeting face-to-face. The anonymity provided a safety that allowed their words to flow freely, unencumbered by the awkwardness physical interaction might bring. May brought decision time. Harvard required her commitment by the 15th. Her father's new medication showed promise. The veterans' housing had a unit available starting in August. Everything aligned perfectly. Yet Eliza still hesitated. "I'm paralyzed," she wrote to Raymond. "Everything is working out, but I still can't make myself say yes." His response came the next day. "Perhaps you're waiting for permission. So here it is. You are allowed to pursue your dreams. You are allowed to build a life that isn't defined by caretaking. You are allowed to shine." The words broke through her final resistance. That afternoon, she submitted her acceptance to Harvard. June brought graduation. Eliza was valedictorian, of course. Her speech centered on resilience and unexpected connections, how strength often comes from invisible sources, how kindness can transform lives without recognition or fanfare. From his place at the back of the gymnasium, Raymond listened, heart swelling with quiet pride for this student he knew intimately through words yet had never properly met. She didn't mention the note specifically, but when she said, "Sometimes wisdom comes from the most unexpected sources, from people we might otherwise overlook," her eyes scanned the audience until they found him. The slightest nod passed between them, acknowledgement, gratitude, connection. After the ceremony, amid the chaos of celebrations, Eliza approached him directly for the first time. "Mr. Ellis," she said simply. "Miss Chen," he replied, her name badge pinned to her honor student sash. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, these two people who had shared their deepest fears and hopes on paper but never spoken aloud. "I wanted to thank you," she finally said, "for everything." "No need for thanks," he responded. "Your notes have been as meaningful to me as mine to you." She smiled, a rare, unguarded expression. "My father's moving into the veterans' housing next month. I'm going to Harvard in the fall, for physics. You'll do remarkable things," he said with certainty. "Because of you." He shook his head. "Number one, iwanam, der wanda wantanum, because of who you are." I just provided a little encouragement along the way. Another silence, comfortable this time. "Would you?" She hesitated. "Would you like to meet my father? He's here somewhere." Raymond's eyes widened slightly. "I'd be honored." As they walked through the crowd, Eliza added, "I told him about you, about the notes. He said you reminded him of his sergeant from Afghanistan, the one who kept them all alive." "High praise indeed," Raymond murmured, deeply touched. The meeting with Eliza's father was brief but significant. Two men who had faced different battles finding common ground in their quiet resilience. Before they parted, Eliza's father gripped Raymond's hand firmly. "Thank you for seeing her," he said simply. "When I couldn't." Those words stayed with Raymond long after graduation day, through the summer as he continued his routine at the nearly empty school, through the fall as a new batch of students filled the hallways, none of them knowing about the notes or the extraordinary student who had gone to Harvard. He continued writing notes, leaving them in random lockers, never knowing their impact. But now he did so with a deeper conviction that words mattered, that kindness rippled outward in ways he might never witness. Eliza thrived at Harvard. The transition wasn't without challenges. Nightmares about her father, imposter syndrome among classmates from privileged backgrounds, the intense academic pressure, but she had developed resilience muscles strong enough to carry her through. She called her father weekly. He was doing well in the veterans community, even mentoring newer residents. And she wrote to Raymond monthly. Proper letters now, detailed accounts of her classes, her research, her growing confidence. He responded with equal thoroughness, sharing news of the school, his tentative steps toward reconnecting with his brother, the continued search for Michael. Years passed. Eliza graduated summa cum laude, then pursued her doctorate in quantum physics. Her research on quantum entanglement showed extraordinary promise, attracting attention from the scientific community worldwide. Raymond retired from Westbrook High after 35 years, but continued volunteering there twice weekly, still leaving his notes in lockers. Then in 2037, the call came that changed everything. "Mr. Ellis?" An unfamiliar voice, formal, slightly accented. "Yes, speaking. My name is Henrik Solberg from the Nobel Committee. I'm calling regarding Dr. Eliza Chen." Raymond's heart stuttered. "Is she all right?" A chuckle. "More than all right, Mr. Ellis. Dr. Chen has been awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for her groundbreaking work on quantum field manipulation. She has specifically requested your presence at the ceremony in Stockholm." Raymond sat heavily, legs suddenly weak. "I don't understand. Dr. Chen insists you played a crucial role in her journey. She's arranging for your travel expenses to be covered. Will you accept the invitation?" Stockholm in December was breathtaking. Snow-covered streets, lights glimmering against the early darkness. The grandeur of centuries-old buildings housing the Nobel ceremonies. Raymond, now 73, had never traveled outside the United States. Everything felt dreamlike, surreal. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of formal presentations, polite applause, languages he didn't understand. But then Eliza was at the podium, radiant in her formal attire, accepting the Nobel Prize in Physics. At 31, she was among the youngest recipients in history. Her acceptance speech began with standard acknowledgments. Professors, colleagues, family. Then she paused, her expression softening. "But my greatest debt of gratitude goes to someone who never taught in a classroom, who holds no academic degrees, whose name appears on none of my research papers. 20 years ago, when I was a scholarship student from a struggling family, contemplating whether higher education was even possible for someone like me, a school custodian named Raymond Ellis began leaving anonymous notes of encouragement in student lockers." A murmur ran through the audience. In his seat, Raymond froze, eyes wide. Mr. Ellis never knew which students might find his notes. He never knew if they made any difference. He simply performed this small act of kindness daily, year after year, touching lives he would never see transformed. Eliza's gaze found him in the audience, her eyes bright with unshed tears. One of his notes read, "Your potential is like a light. Don't dim it to make others comfortable." Those words changed the trajectory of my life at a critical moment. They gave me permission to pursue excellence without apology, to believe my mind was worth developing despite circumstances that suggested otherwise. She gestured toward him. "Mr. Ellis is here today. Would you stand, sir, so we can acknowledge your contribution?" Raymond stood slowly, trembling slightly as the ornate hall erupted in applause. Eliza continued, "The science we celebrate today began with quantum theory's recognition that observation itself affects outcomes, that nothing exists in isolation, that everything is connected in ways we're only beginning to understand." Mr. Ellis demonstrated this profound truth through simple notes on paper, creating ripples of change he could never have predicted. After the ceremony, they stood together at the reception, an unlikely pair, the Nobel laureate and the retired custodian, surrounded by the world's intellectual elite. "I never expected this," Raymond said quietly. "Never imagined anything like this." Eliza smiled. "That's what makes it so beautiful. You didn't do it for recognition or impact. You did it because kindness was who you were, not what you did." "Were," he repeated, his expression thoughtful. "Past tense. Is that wrong?" He considered for a moment. "I was kind in actions back then, but I think I've become kindness now. There's a difference." She nodded, understanding perfectly. "Like the difference between doing physics and becoming a physicist." "Precisely." He hesitated, then added, "I found Michael." Her eyes widened. "Your son?" "When?" "3 months ago. He's in Oregon. has 2 children. Raymond's voice grew thick. We're talking. Slowly. There's much to repair, but there's willingness on both sides. I'm so happy for you, she said, squeezing his hand. It wouldn't have happened without our correspondence. You encouraged me to keep trying when I wanted to give up the search. A photographer approached, asking to take their picture. As they posed, Eliza whispered, "Full circle." The encourager encouraged. The photo would appear in scientific journals worldwide. The brilliant young physicist and the elderly man beside her, both beaming with a joy that transcended the formal occasion, a connection deeper than words. Later that night, back in his hotel room, Raymond found a note slipped under his door. He recognized Eliza's handwriting immediately. Some acts of kindness change lives. Some change the world. Yours did both. With eternal gratitude, 1422. He held the paper to his heart, eyes closed, feeling the presence of Margaret beside him, imagining her pride. Across the ocean, his son was considering a visit this coming spring. And here in Stockholm, a brilliant young woman had reached scientific heights partly because of notes written in pre-dawn quiet. Not all connections were visible to the naked eye. Not all impacts could be measured. But they existed nonetheless. These quantum entanglements of human kindness, binding them all together across time and circumstance. Invisible threads woven through the fabric of existence. Raymond carefully folded Eliza's note and placed it in his wallet, next to the very first note she had ever written him, now faded and worn from 20 years of caring. Tomorrow he would write another note, not for a student this time, but for himself. A reminder that no act of kindness, however small, was ever truly wasted. In the quantum field of human connection, everything mattered. Everyone mattered. And sometimes the smallest actions created the greatest changes of all.